Your Excellency, Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the Honorable Brigadier Retired Mark Phillips, Prime Minister, the Honorable Madam Justice Yonette Cummings Edwards, OR, CCH, Chancellor of the Judiciary, Acting, the Honorable Mansour Nadir, Speaker of the National Assembly, the Honorable Mr. Mohabir Anil Nandlal, SC MP, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh, Senior Minister within the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Mrs. Shalimar Ali Haq, SC Director of Public Prosecutions, Dr. Carla Barnett, Solicitor General, Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General for CARICOM, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, judges of the Court of Appeal and High Court of the Supreme Court of Judicature, judges of the High Court of the Supreme Court of Judicature, Mr. Donald Ramatar, former President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Mr. Justice Charles Ramson, SCOR, former Attorney General and retired Justice of the Appeal, and Mrs. Ramson, Mr. Carl Singh, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary, Ministers of Government and members of Cabinet, members of Parliament, Chief Magistrate and members of the Magistracy, widow and immediate family members and relatives of the late Ashton Chase, OE, SC, members of the Inner Bar, members of the Outer Bar, other members of the legal profession, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Kiyomo Griffith, and I am your Master of Ceremonies this afternoon, and I promise you this is not my day job. I was asked by Ms. Chase to chair these proceedings, and in fact, I consider it a pleasure and an honor to be associated with such a legacy, that of Mr. Chase. Today we gather to celebrate and continue the work and legacy of Ashton Chase, a recipient of Guyana's highest national award, the Order of Excellence and of Senior Counsel. Some 98 years ago, on this very day, one of Guyana's most outstanding sons was born, a legal luminary, a giant in the jurisprudential architecture of this region, renowned for making an exceptional contribution to Guyana's nationalist struggle and political history. Ashton Chase, or the Bengal Tiger, as he is often referred, was a son of fierce fortitude and deep strategic intellect. In a tribute following his passing, His Excellency is quoted as placing Mr. Chase among this country's finest legal minds, a pillar of our country's early trade union activism, and authoring the most authoritative work on our trade union history. While it is evident that Mr. Ashton Chase, OESC, has ascended to the highest levels as an advocate in the legal profession and in this country's political fabric, you will hear of his contrastingly humble beginnings. Such humility remained with him until his final days in 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, please therefore help me welcome the eldest of Ashton Chase's 3 children, Dr. Ronald Chase, to share briefly of the life and work of our beloved Ashton Chase. Please help me welcome him.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Excellency, Mr. President, Dr. Irfan Ali, distinguished guests, friends, and family. First, let me thank you on behalf of the Chase family for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here this evening to help us celebrate the life of Ashton Alton Chase and to celebrate him and to launch his Ashton Chase, Inc. Ashton departed us on July 10, 2023, just 1 week short of spending 97 years with us on this beautiful country. Ashton, during that time, left a lasting and unique impact on many citizens. He changed many lives, transformed many lives, and had multiple professions in which he brought together in the legal, labor, and trade union and politics. See, Ashton's greatest passion was being a trade unionist. Ashton was raised by his grandmother from a very early age, a woman he affectionately called Da. And she was deeply involved in the early trade union movement in Guyana, British Guyana at that time. And she would take Ashton to meetings at night with her. And he paid attention while he was doing his own thing, but he developed a love and a calling for trade unionism. So much so that at the age of 17, Ashton went to work at the British Guyana Labor Union. He took a clerical job and worked his way up. He could have gotten a more lucrative job elsewhere, but trade unionism was his calling, and he decided to stick with it. He rose to become the Assistant Secretary for the British Guyana Labor Union, and met Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, who's considered our father of trade unionism in Guyana, and learned from him. His talent and passion for trade unionism was recognized by the British Trade Union Council and Congress, and they gave him a scholarship to go study trade unionism in London and also economics at Ruskin College in Oxford, which he did. And he came back armed with that knowledge and continued to advocate for the working class. Ashton eventually formed his own union, the NASI, National Association of Agricultural, Commercial, and Industrial Employees, of which he was president for many years. And that union was very important in playing a role for the struggles of trade unions in Guyana and also for electoral democracy. Ashton took the struggles of the trade unions to the halls of justice on many occasions, winning good battles for the labor movement and labor in general. Ashton was also a politician. He met the former president, Dr. Chetty Jagan, at an early age, and with Chetty and Ashton and Janet Jagan and Jocelyn Hubbard, they formed what was called the Political Affairs Committee in 1946. That later morphed into the People's Progressive Party, the PPP, and Ashton campaigned tirelessly around the country for the PPP. They eventually won the elections in 1953, and Ashton was named the Minister of Labour of British Guyana. He was the youngest minister at that time, only aged 27. Ashton and the PPP embarked on an ambitious agenda to try to unwrap the chains of colonialism from around Guyana, but the Brits would have none of it. And the Brits sent in their troops and dissolved the Constitution, and the rest is history. Ashton, however, continued to be a staunch leader of the PPP. In the 1960s, he was a member of Parliament. He was also named President of the Senate for the PPP, and continued to be a leader among the PPP until his early 70s, when he stepped back to allow the younger folks to take over. But he continued to be an advisor for the PPP throughout all these years. As a politician, Ashton was also a member of the Public Service Commission in the mid-1970s, and also a member of an organization called the GUARD, G-U-A-R-D, which is Guyanese Action for Reform and Democracy. And that organization emerged in the late 1980s to join the fight for free and fair elections in Guyana. So Ashton was involved in the struggle for democracy in Guyana from the 1940s until the 1990s and even beyond. And he left a lasting mark on the political foundation of pre- and post-independent Guyana. The thing Ashton was most proud about was being a lawyer. So after 1953, when the Brits came in and dissolved the Constitution, Ashton had an opportunity to go study law in England. He went to the University of London, and he graduated with honors and was inducted into the bar at Gray's Inn in 1957. Ashton returned to Guyana and opened his law practice, and that was also a very successful practice. He continued to practice law until his early 90s. It was only the pandemic that stopped him from climbing up the stairs of the courts. And during that time, Ashton took many cases to the Court of Appeal, and most of these cases became legal and constitutional history. So Ashton was able to change the face of law. He advocated for the working class and for the small man throughout his career. He was anointed as senior counsel in 1985, a title that had eluded him for several years due to his political affiliation. Ashton was also president of the Guyana Bar Association on many occasions, especially during some of the years of political unrest in this country. But he challenged the establishment even at that level. And it was a time when it was personally hazardous to do so, but he was fearless. And he continued to fight for democracy in this country. During his tenure as president of the Bar Association, he was able to elevate that organization to higher levels, and it became a very prominent and important organization in the country. Ashton was also in the political reform early in the 1950s with the PPP, and continued his politics throughout. One of his crowning moments was watching the PPP being inducted, PPP Civic, being inducted in after the last 2020 elections. He was at home, and you can see the pride on his face as you watch it on TV. A smile came to his face as he looked at his party being crowned again into government. As a politician, Ashton also did many things as a lawyer, I should say. He was also a chairman and co-founder of the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic, which Ashton realized that people who were less fortunate and couldn't afford legal advice and representation needed it, and he didn't forget where he came from. So he founded this organization to provide legal advice and representation to those who were unable to afford it. So Ashton had a very successful career as a lawyer, and he was able to bring together his law practice, his trade union skills, and his skills as a politician to make a difference in this country. Despite wearing all these hats as a politician, a lawyer, and a trade unionist, Ashton also found time to write. He was a very prolific author. One of his best books is A History of Trade Unionism in Guyana, 1900 to 1961, which is a compendium of the labor union movement in Guyana, which should be read by everyone who's interested in that movement. Other titles that Ashton wrote was 133 Days Towards Freedom in Guyana. He also wrote a book called Law of Workers' Compensation, Industrial Relations, Industrial Law, and Trade Union in the Caribbean. He also wrote Arise Africa. He found time to write despite his busy schedule. The only thing he didn't do was write an autobiography of himself, but his good friend Nanda Gopal did write a biography on Ashton Chase, which he called the Bengal Tiger. And that was to reflect Ashton's characteristics of the Bengal Tiger, which is fearless, intelligent, strategic. And those were some of the books that Ashton wrote. In addition, Ashton had some other attributes. Remember, he said he went to study economics. He used that knowledge to become the vice president of the Guyana Economic Society in the mid-1970s. He also was the president of the Republic Bank of Guyana Limited, and that institution became very successful under his tenure. And he still was named honorary president until his passing last year. Ashton also achieved many things personally in life. He was also the member of the governors of the University of Guyana during the 1960s. He was listed in the Who's Who in Law. He was also named one of the top 10 professionals in the world by the International Biographical Center in England in the early 2000s. He was also a past master of the Lodge Harmony and also the past master of the Guyana Lodge of Research. His most crowning achievement was being awarded the Order of Excellence by the government of Guyana, which is the highest distinction that any Guyanese could be afforded. It is a distinction that is given to those who have shown distinction and eminence in the field of human endeavor. Ashton initially did not want to accept this award, but he agreed to after his arm was twisted by his best friend, who I call Uncle Bunny. He's my Ashton's little brother. For most of you in this room, he's the Honorable Charles Ramson, Senior, SC, and OR. I hope I got it right, but he's family, so he wouldn't take it out on me. So. Yes, Uncle Bunny was able to twist his arm, and he eventually accepted the award. Because Ashton was not about accolades. He didn't care about those things. But Uncle Bunny was able to convince him to accept the award. So Ashton was just a regular person. He was a down-to-earth person, a humble person. He liked socializing. He was there, always had a joke to tell at any party to lighten up the atmosphere. He gave freely of himself. He liked sports. He liked to play cricket and soccer at an early age. He was a very good table tennis player, an excellent swimmer. And he played card games, Scrabble, Solitaire. He's just a regular, down-to-earth person, likable person that everyone enjoyed. He was very polite, never heard him raise his voice at anybody, and was always smiling. He liked to dance, he liked partying. He was just a regular person. In addition, Ashton was really a family man. Ashton was a loving husband, an amazing father, a kind-hearted grandfather, and a caring cousin and uncle and godfather to many. Ashton lived and enjoyed 4 to 6 years of blissful marriage with Debbie, and they supported each other and was able to hold the family unit together. And Ashton was the patriarch of our family for the last 2 or 3 decades. Always there to give advice, to support us and encourage us along the way. To Pauline, Sarita, and I, his children, he was an amazing father. He never demanded anything of us, but he was always there to encourage us and support us and guide us along the way. Never asked us to do anything, but we knew what he expected of us, and I don't think we turned out too badly. We couldn't ask for a better father. So Ashton was greatly a family man. He was always there to give advice and support to all his family members. 2 quick anecdotes, and then I'll wrap this up. So back in the late 1970s, around 1980, around 1980, because Walter Rodney was prominent at that time. My best friend, Amanat Singh, and I were having a few beers at a spot called Rico. Some of you might know that spot. And it was at a time when the ugly head of the Venezuela-Guyana border issue had risen up again. And at that time, things were a little bit different. Venezuela economy was booming, oil was flowing, they were in bed with the Americans, you know, they had the best army in South America. And things were not so good in Guyana. Our economy was bad, didn't have foreign exchange to buy a lot of stuff. The shelves in the supermarkets were empty, you had to line up for things, you know. We had blackouts, well, we still have blackouts, so forget about that part. But yeah, things were looking up. And I just turned to Amanat while we were having these beers, and I said to him, you know, it might not be a bad idea if some Guyanese had access to the Venezuelan economy. At least we can stop the brain drain, because we had a bad brain drain at that time. And that was it. That was it. You know, we fast forward to a few hours later, we're in the backyard having a swim, and Ashton comes home, he has his snack, relaxes a little bit, comes downstairs to take a swim. And my friend Amanat, who my family knows has a big mouth, turned to Ashton and said, Mr. Chase, do you know what your son said today? He said it would be good if Venezuela took over Guyana. Well, all swimming stopped, right? Pauline had to go upstairs crying. She always liked to swim with us. And we had to get out of the pool and sit on the ledge and listen to a lecture from Ashton on patriotism. It wasn't so much a lecture, but a talk, but it felt like a lecture to me. And at the end of it, I felt so small, I felt like going out and signing up for national service right away, you know? Well, he almost made me do that too. It was Debbie that got me out of that situation. But I tell you that story just to say that, you know, Ashton was deeply involved in the struggle at that time for democracy. And it was a time when his life was in danger. But he was still a Guyanese, a patriot, a true Guyanese, you know, Chinese hero. Second anecdote, I belong to an organization called the American Foundation University of the West Indies, based in New York, an organization that just honored our president a few months ago. But back about 8 years ago, we had a similar function. And I was introduced to the vice chancellor of the University of West Indies at that time. Don't remember his name, I think it was Dr. Harris, but anyway. Smart guy, very intelligent guy, spoke perfect English, studied erect, you know. And we were talking, and then suddenly something clicked, and he turned to me and he said, Chase, right, Chase? He said, you're from Guyana? I said, yes. He said, do you know Ashton Chase? So I said, well, he's my father. His first words after that was, man, you're from good pedigree. Well, I knew that, but, my head started to swell a little bit, And then he continued to tell me all these things about Ashton and what he did for the Caribbean, what he did for University of West Indies and Guyana and so on. And my head is swelling and swelling. Just about when it's about to burst through the walls, the waiter comes around the little bell and said, it's time to go into the dinner reception is over. So he excused himself and goes into the dining area. I knew we had about half an hour because there's 300 West Indians to sit at tables that they were assigned and they don't want to sit at. So I said, let me go call my dad and let him know what this guy just said. So I go over by the window, make sure I got good reception on the phone, called Dad, got him on the phone. Usual greeting, how are you, Dad? He always said, I'm doing fine, still walking with a stick. So his pet peeve was walking with a stick. And to which I would say, oh, well, you're better than most and more blessed than many. So anyway, I thought I just met this guy, he's the Vice Chancellor of University of West Indies. I told him all the wonderful things that this guy had to say to him about him. And, most of the fathers in this room, if your child calls you up and tells you these things, you'll be beating your chest and saying, yes, son, that's me, no, not Ashton. And those of you who know Ashton Chase well would appreciate his response. After I told him all these wonderful things about himself, all Ashton said was, oh dear. Oh dear. So, and I was taken back, but I realized who I was talking to. And 2 or 3 seconds later, he said, how are my grandchildren and my daughter-in-law? So I told him about his grandchildren, and my wife Roxanne, and then I said, listen, Dad, you have to go have your dinner, I have to go into dinner, so I'll talk to you later. But I tell you that story because Ashton was a humble man. He didn't care about all the accolades, he didn't care about all the things. He did that for service to his country, service to the people. He didn't care about any of those things. It just went in one ear, came out the other ear. And secondly, to tell you that he was a family man. All he cared about was his family. So that's basically Ashton in a nutshell. So after hearing all these things about Ashton, it's clear that on this date, July 18th, 1926, a star was born. A star that shone brightly on the face of Guyana for almost 10 decades. A star that I dare say is still shining today. Right? I mean, let's face it. You can't talk about politics in Guyana without talking about the PPP, and if you talk about the PPP, you have to talk about Ashton Chase. You can't talk about trade unionism in Guyana without talking about Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, and right after that name, you're going to mention Ashton Chase. You can't talk about lawyers in Guyana without talking about those who have received senior counsel status and who have defended cases that are still landmark cases and are quoted by his peers today, and among those few is Ashton Chase. You can't talk about scholarly literary productions written by Guyanese without talking about the history of trade unionism in Guyana, 1900 to 1961, and that was written by Ashton Chase. You can't talk about upright citizens of this country who have dedicated their lives to the service of this country and the people uplifting this country and the people in this country without talking about those who have received the Order of Excellence, and among those few is Ashton Chase. So the name Ashton Chase pervades through the fabric of this nation. His contributions have uplifted this country. They should never be forgotten. His name should never be forgotten. I'm going to leave it up to the powers that be to decide how best that could be done. But we, the family, wife, widow, Deborah, daughters, Pauline and Sarita and myself, and grandchildren, Wade Ashton, Rachel, Rihanna, Raven, Rashada, cousins, Claude, Taney, and others. And of course, his brother from another brother, Uncle Bunny, Honorable Charles Ramson Sr. We've all decided that we're going to carry on this legacy, right? We cannot walk in his shoes. They're pretty big shoes to fill, but we can certainly carry on along the path that he's created for us. And we can stand on his shoulders and try to achieve the ultimate vision that Ashton Chase had for his beloved nation, and that is a one Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chase. It's interesting that you considered Mr. Chase as just a regular person. There was simply nothing regular about him. He was extraordinary, a patriot involved in the struggle for trade unionism, democracy, and the legal profession. Please remain in your seats as you will be treated to a special video presentation paying tribute to the life of Ashton Chase, OESC.
Today we celebrate the life and work of a national treasure, the trade unionist, the author, the politician, the lawyer, Mr. Ashton Chase. Ashton Chase was born on July 18, 1926, in the then British Guyana.
His father was a comedian and in the evenings, and he fixed bikes during the day. And his mother looked after him, and she passed regrettably when he was very young. And he was brought up by his grandmother, who washed clothes for a living. And so he came from a working class family. He came from a poor family, not by any means rich, but I think that really grounded him in who he was. His grandmother was very active in the union, and she took him along to union meetings at a very young age, at about 8. She was a secretary, and he would help her take minutes, notes. And that's where his grounding in the union really started, by accompanying her to meetings.
Along with the late Chetty Jagan, the late Janet Jagan, and the late Joycelyn Hubbard, Mr. Chase formed the Political Affairs Committee, which was the precursor of the formation of the People's Progressive Party.
Young Ashton Chase started to participate in trade union activities and then political activism as a teenager. And while still a teenager, was instrumental in and
he was always on time, always punctual. Family came first. He, no matter how busy he was, and he wore a lot of different hats, he always found time for family. Went on family vacations in August. He would have dinner with us every night. We would go on the seawalls in the evenings. He swam every single afternoon. That was his exercise. And we would be there with him, spending time. He did homework with us in the evenings. No matter what he achieved in whatever sphere, whether it's politics, law, as an author, as a trade unionist, he was always humble and integrity unquestioned.
Ashton was a firm believer in Guyana's strength as a diverse nation. He recognized our diversity and considered it to be a source of remarkable strength and advantage. There's no doubt that his participation in the founding of the PAC and his continued love and support for the party throughout his life, there's no doubt that that would have contributed to the PPP's strength as Guyana's only true, diverse and multi-ethnic party.
On the first anniversary of his death, we extend sincerest condolences to his family and friends and pray that his soul continues to rest in peace.
Thank you very much. Please help me welcome Ms. Pauline Chase, Attorney at Law and Vice President of the Bar Association of Guyana, an association with which Mr. Chase was integrally involved in its formation and for which he also served as president during the periods in the 1980s. Please help me welcome her.
Thank you. Mr. President, if you'll permit me to adopt the protocols so elegantly and competently established by our chairperson this afternoon. We know it can be longer, as I think he holds the record for the longest salutations. He actually hosted a 2-day criminal law conference last week, and I think his opening salutations were longer than the conference. But I promise I won't be long this afternoon. The heels won't permit me to stand for too long, so I'll be very short. My brother shared some anecdotes, and just one. My father was, as he mentioned, very funny. And when I was studying, I was in Barbados, reading for my Bachelor's of Laws, and he was going to one of, actually, Uncle Bunny's birthdays. I wouldn't say which one, because I don't want to age myself. But he was actually going to one of his birthdays, and I called him, and we were on the phone, and I said, well, while you're there, eating your fancy food and having a good time, think about your poor daughter here at school eating bread and jam. And he says, my darling, at least you have jam. So with that being said, how do you encapsulate Ashton Chase? A man who was larger than life, a man who did so much with his life, operated in different spheres, all at the highest levels, with unparalleled excellence. As a trade unionist, a politician, an attorney at law, and an author, as we've heard this afternoon. After his passing last year, descriptions such as national hero and national treasure emerged. And as we, as a family, mourned our loss, and we still continue to navigate the process of mourning, we faced the challenge of formulating sufficient means in which to honor, pay tribute, and continue his life's work. A life so well spent cannot wither away with death. Unfortunately for us, nothing seemed sufficient to capture him. We first considered a foundation, But that is limited in scope and perhaps a bit too pervasive, for such a unique man. We considered a trust, but that also did not give the depth of scope to cover all the facets we wish to pursue. And in the end, the answer was quite simple. The vehicle of a company gives the necessary depth and flexibility. But then, what do we call it? And again, the answer was quite simple, as most things were with Dad. Uncomplicated, without fuss, and without the need for gloss. Ashton Chase was an institution within himself, and it was only fitting that the name of the body in his memory reflected that. In addressing himself, he simply used the name Ashton Chase. No prefix, no suffix, no letters before, no letters after. Even in pleadings he filed in the High Court, his name simply appeared Ashton Chase in block letters. No Mr., he did not use SC, he did not use OE. And if it did appear, I assure you it wasn't his doing. And in the end, they really weren't necessary for him. Ashton Chase conveyed all that it needed to convey. And so, that was it. Ashton Chase Inc. was born, a not-for-profit to promote his life, work, and ideals. As many of you are aware, Dad was a fertile writer, and as my brother mentioned, penning no less than 8 books on various topics, from law texts to politics and even current affairs. Sadly, although these publications are still sought after, none are in print, save and except for 133 Days Towards Freedom, which is available at the Michael Ford Bookshop at Freedom House, and I would commend it as a required read about the first government formed in 1953 under universal adult suffrage, the PPP. Its success, despite challenges, and really a testament as to what we as a people can achieve as a nation when we work together. Our chambers regularly receives inquiries, particularly for the history of trade unionism, which is still relevant to today, and for anyone in the labor field, a must-read and referred to as mandatory for many university programs. So, our first order of business following this launch would be to embark on a reprint of his books and updating editions where necessary, particularly the law texts. And let me say right now, I make a disclaimer, I do not intend to embark on updating the history of trade unionism for where he left off. That is a monumental task, but I hope someone does do it because it is necessary. Dr. Nanda Gopal has generously made his book on that, The Bengal Tiger, as my brother referred to earlier, and edited by Justice, this is how you do it, Justice Charles Ramson, ORSC, available to Ashton Chase Inc. for sale, and is available here this afternoon for anyone who wishes copies. And I'm sure if you ask Dr. Gopal nicely, he'll autograph it for you. All proceeds from the sale of these books and other income to the not-for-profit will go towards the purpose, therefore, and to fund scholarships in the field of labor law. As we know, the trade union movement was my father's enduring love. His passion and labor law was where he first made his mark in the legal profession, in such cases as Muhammad Ali in the AG and Bentic, which remain authorities to this day. And I think Muhammad Ali is inarguably his best work, if you read that case. It was him at his finest. Today, there aren't too many who seem to gravitate and specialize in the field of labor law in Guyana, and we do hope to remedy this through scholarship opportunities. It is an area of law in which those who are specialized are still very much needed. Through the proactive action of John Hoosty Designs, a domain name has been secured, ashtonchaseinc.com, and will be populated to be a resource for those wanting to know more about him, his life, and his work. Today is a start, but as we proceed, there will be other activities through which his life, work, teachings, and ideals will be advanced. Although we are a private family, we understand that it would be selfish of us not to share certain aspects of his life, which hold lessons, act as inspiration as to what is possible, and share important historical information. We understand our duty in this regard. My father's greatness was surpassed only by his humility. He did not like fuss, and with all of this, he would have given his endearing response, as we heard this afternoon. If he had seen all of this, he would have said, "Oh dear." But in the end, there is no escaping for a man who's so integrally woven into the fabric of our beloved nation. And he always said, if you can do something, you do it. It's that simple. You don't look for anything in return. If there's something that needs to be done and you think you can do it, you do it. He said that's how they got started. They simply just didn't like the environment they were living under, and they thought that they could do better, and they did it. There are many who have gone before us, bore unspeakable sacrifice, and on whose shoulders we stand. It cannot be an acceptable state of affairs that their names, image, life, and work are not known. It is an indictment on us as a failure of a collective responsibility, and I urge that this be remedied through an active approach. A few weeks ago, I posted on my Instagram stories a picture of the late Janet Jagan and Jocelyn Hubbard, and I asked how many people knew them. No one could recognize them. No one could recognize an early, young Janet Jagan or Jocelyn Hubbard. How could that be? Jocelyn Hubbard and Janet Jagan, who were so integral to this nation. In closing, my family and I would like to acknowledge and thank everyone who has supported us over the past year. And we have indeed received an outpouring of support, a love which has wrapped us and kept us safe and going as we continue to cope with our loss. Your Excellency, thank you. As all of you know, I wear also many different hats and hold a wide array of responsibilities, and I generally could not do it without a tremendous amount of support and understanding in each field, and particularly over the past year. I wish to therefore personally extend my thanks to all of you, the PPC Secretariat, QCOSA executives and members, the Bar Association executive and members, and the person who keeps me all together, my secretary, Ms. Karen Sukram, who keeps it all woven and keeps me on track. My family and I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to be here this afternoon. As the saying goes, you could have been anywhere else in the world, but you chose to be here with us. And for that, we are most grateful, and it tells us that we're on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pauline Chase. Very large shoes for you to fill. On the program, you will note the feature address will be delivered by the President. However, I have specific instructions from Ms. Chase that no one speaks after His Excellency. It is therefore incumbent upon me to acknowledge some folks who made today very possible. Special thank you to Your Excellency, the Government of Guyana, and all the officers involved for all the facilities extended to Ashton Chase, Inc. in making today possible. It is warming to see that the interest in ensuring the legacy of Ashton Chase is kept alive and relevant. Special thank you to the Honorable Kwame McCoy, Minister within the Office of the Prime Minister, and Ms. Nadia Holidar from NCN, who are responsible for coordinating and preparing the special video tribute. Special thanks to the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Justice Charles Ramson Sr., ORSC, Dr. Ashni Singh, Dr. Nanda Gopal, and of course Ms. Pauline Chase, and all those who contributed to the video. Special thank you to everyone represented here who took the time out to attend this event. Now, after the President's feature address, please be sure to join us for our cocktail reception and melodies from the Guyana Police Force Orchestra as we continue to celebrate the launch of Ashton Chase, Inc. Now, coming at this time to give the feature address is none other than Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Please stand and help me welcome His Excellency.
Thank you very much. Please. Before I go any further, let me assure you that I had no conversation or plan with the Right Honorable Ashton Chase in the choice of our shirt today. Our distinguished Prime Minister, Chancellor, members of the family, and I'm for the love you shared with this nation in sharing an outstanding husband, father, grandfather, an outstanding human being with all of Guyana. And we salute not only your father, but you, the family, in sharing him with us. Members of the judiciary, members of cabinet, former Attorney General, Justice Ramson, our former President, Donald Ramatar, former Chancellor, and all the distinguished men and women gathered here together. It is a significant moment in a continuation of the story of Guyana that we celebrate the launch of Ashton Chase, Inc. And I assure Ronald that the point on which you left the podium is the project that we are so committed to. And it is the project that is most important in the story of this beautiful nation, that is building one Guyana. It is not accidental nor incidental that you chose to leave on those two very strong words. The question that boggles the mind sometimes is what constitutes one and how that constitution of one is embedded in what is our beloved home, Guyana. And for me, my humble understanding of what constitutes one is that oneness and commonality through which we share the importance of freedom, democracy, rule of law, and the commonality of the values we share together that constitute what make us Guyana and Guyanese. One Guyana is not symbolic. One Guyana is not artistic. One Guyana is deep and carries with it deep meaning. To uphold what constitutes one Guyana requires citizens that carry the values, pedigree, the characteristics, the standards of what make us one Guyana. And today we celebrate one of the finest of such soul, Ashton Chase, and put your hands together for him. I would say that he would not have liked the way in which we are launching this today, because of the simple and humble man he was. Quite contrary to his daughter. But I must say she shared his value system, and she shared what he stood for, and that is what is important. I have had and continue to have the opportunity of knowing this family. And what struck me the deepest about this father, this great Ashton Chase, is the way in which he ensured that the values he fought for and the things that meant what constitute nationhood for him were instilled in his family members, and the values that they share are no different from what he shared. Sometimes legends are rare in an environment in which they operate. But when legends create other legends in the environment, it gives them a different status. I would say it was inefficient in the length of time it took to incorporate Ashton Chase Inc. and register it as a nonprofit. But I guess it was not inefficient, it was timely, because this was the right occasion in which we launched this very important nonprofit. Now, we have heard a lot about the great Ashton Chase. When I spoke at the function celebrating his life, at the end of it, many persons asked me for a copy of what I said. Unfortunately, I did not spend the time to document what I had said, because I spoke of the man who we all should know. Today, I would not make that mistake. I want to ensure that those who would like to have a copy can have a copy at the end of what I have to say. But you heard some description of Ashton Chase. And we asked ourselves, how often can we find one person who brings together all of what he constitutes? A nationalist, a fearless person. Today you have nationalists who are fearless. Many people consider themselves brave nationalists, but are fearless when faced with making certain decisions and when faced with certain challenges. So not only was he a nationalist, he was fearless. My apologies, Speaker. I did not see you there. Let me recognize you. He was selfless. He was brilliant, but yet humble. He was an important member of the academic community. He had a global outlook. But importantly, if you read his work, you would realize that he had strategic regional thinking. But in that strategic regional thinking, he had a national purpose. So he was never thinking in narrow national mode. He was always having this global outlook, refined through regional thinking, but always with a national purpose. He was a professional. He was a lawyer. Importantly, he shaped the fabric of what makes us the Guyanese society, and he was deeply connected. He was deeply connected with the people of our country. It is not fame, power, or position that drove him. It was his connection with people and his desire to ensure people were treated equally, fairly, and people had access to justice. Now, access to justice at that time, as Justice Ramson made the point, was difficult because of the environment in which justice was administered. You may have had the resources to have access to justice, but that did not translate in having access to justice. You had to have persons who were fearless of the environment, persons who understood what was more important in the environment in which they're operating, and then had the will to represent. And that is a powerful aspect of Ashton Chase. His ability to connect with the people of this country is what allowed him to be associated with the challenges of the country and led him to be part of the solution. And this, I think, is what helped in shaping him to be one of our finest. Ashton Chase's place in the history of Guyana and the Caribbean is assured. And I just want to correct Pauline on this subject. If we confine Ashton Chase's contribution to Guyana, we're doing an injustice to his work. Because Ashton Chase was a regional man. He believed strongly in the regional approach. He advocated for labor throughout the region, and we cannot take him out of his contribution in the Caribbean and not acknowledge his contribution in the region. The passage of time will not diminish or render irrelevant the ideals that he stood for and passionately defended. Ashton Chase is considered the foremost authority on the history of trade unionism in Guyana and the Caribbean. But he was not merely an academic in trade unionism. He was in the trenches and a leader of trade union that has left a legacy in advancing workers' rights and Caribbean independence. And Caribbean independence. It is one thing to have the legal brilliance, to have the charm and all that is required to advance an argument. But when you match advancing that argument with actually working in the trenches, working alongside the workers, being there with them in the plight for justice and freedom, you're at a different level. You're at a completely different level. And that is what distinguished him from many, many others. As a lawyer, he has enjoyed acclaim as a highly respected legal eagle, one whose name is permanently etched in local and regional law reports. He was also an outstanding nationalist, contributing to the struggle for political independence. As a politician, he played a significant role in the struggle for national liberation. As a parliamentarian, he had the foresight and forewarned us about the threats to democracy which he saw emerging. If only more people had listened to him, if only more people had listened to him, this country would have been spared the economic and political calamity that befell it between 1968 and 1992. As a minister in the 1953 PPP government, he spearheaded initiatives and piloted legislation that empowered the working class. As I alluded to during service honoring his life, he will forever be remembered as a national treasure, a man of dedication and integrity, and in terms of his legacy, an example of someone whose commitment to a higher mission has left an impact on our nation. And for those who question the caliber of such men and women in our history and in world history, just pay attention to the elections of the United States, and you would understand that the very things that these men and women fought for, workers' rights, equality of access, integrity of office, are fundamental issues debated in the US as they seek to elect a new president. And that alone tells a story. That the ideals and ideas, the work, the writing of such men will forever be relevant once we live in a society in which injustice, workers' rights, democracy, freedom, inequality, disparity, climate injustice, energy injustice, once those things exist, the relevance of the life and work lived by such men as Ashton Chase would be not only significant, but most important. While Ashton Chase's legacy remains firmly intact, it is imperative that present and future generations actively benefit from the ideals he championed and the wealth of knowledge he left in his writings, legal submissions, and speeches. As a role model, Chase's example should inspire our children and their children. His ideals must be preserved and propagated, for within them lie the seeds for building a just, inclusive, and democratic society. And this is important for us to ensure that these stories, these ideals, the passion of these people, the work of these extraordinary souls are told to our children, and they will tell it to their children. I'll give you a little example. Since Sunday, well, my son always finds himself next to me as I look at Bloomberg, whether it's 1 in the morning, to see the summary of markets or news. And I was shocked last night I was looking at the Republican convention, and my son turned to me and said, "Dad, that's the president with blood on his ear." I did not recognize that he was paying such attention to the news that he knew what took place Sunday, because I then questioned him and could have said to me who this person was, a former president who's trying to be president again. And I was shocked. But it told me a story that in these children's mind, there's a receptive place for what we instill in them. And if we instill the history of our country and the history of these great men and women, Pauline, you're correct, then we will never be in a place where people or our history will be forgotten, or people who contributed so significantly will be forgotten. Yes, I acknowledged this before, we do a poor job in this country at keeping and recognizing those who contribute significantly to our country. That is why I asked Minister Charles Ramson to look at the park next to the Parliament building, so we can convert that part in an area in which we celebrate all of these people in a very public place. But more important than these symbolic but important gestures is how we shape the minds, how we instill the history of Guyana in the minds of our children. And that is the bigger task. That is the more important task. Because if our children and us know the history of our country, then all of us will be custodian of that history. And all of us will carry the weight of that history. It is not difficult to identify the ideals for which he stood and which remain relevant in today's and tomorrow's society. Those ideals revolve around restoring the purity of the political vocation, protecting the covenant of democracy, upholding the rights and aspirations of workers, especially in this age of globalization, ensuring that the law is of service to people, ensuring the law is of service to people and to the cause of justice and the value of personal integrity in public life. Ashton Chase viewed politics not as a path to self-fulfillment or status or fame, but as a vocation of service. For Ashton Chase, politics was about the passion for advancing the betterment of the working class. He believed that this cause should be pursued with steadfast dedication, and he was uncompromised by this. His career exemplified his belief. He consistently prioritized the needs and rights of workers and remained pure in his dedication to his political vocation. Through his work in trade unions, his legal advocacy, and his role in the People's Progressive Party, Chase demonstrated that true leadership is rooted in selfless service and unyielding commitment to justice and equality. For Ashton Chase, democracy was a sacred covenant with the people. It represented a bond that had to be vigilantly safeguarded from the machinations of political dictators. On the opposition benches, Between 1964 and 1968, he warned the nation about the perils he foresaw. The emergence of a fascist dictatorship. He highlighted how the law could be manipulated to undermine this pact between the people and their government. He was prophetic in parliamentary debates and his legal advocacy. He underscored and his implicit plea for the protection of democratic principles against any form of authoritative rule or dictatorship. Ashton Chase was the undisputed champion of the workers' rights in Guyana. Ashton Chase was the undisputed champion of workers' rights in Guyana. He has dedicated over 7 decades of his life to their protection through both politics and law, a feat unlikely to be surpassed. For Chase, workers were the salt of the earth. He genuinely believed in them, and for him, their rights and interests were paramount. In this age of globalization, he would have been acutely aware of the growing threats to workers' rights, including the tendency to prioritize profit over people. He would have been appalled and outraged at such practices. Ashton would have wanted nothing less than to halt the global race to the bottom in labor standards and weaken labor protections that in many parts of the world leave workers vulnerable in unfair treatment and economic insecurity. Promoting his legacy must entail safeguarding workers' rights against these modern challenges and ensuring that their dignity and contributions remain recognized and respected here and in the Caribbean. On that note, I want to recognize the Secretary General of CARICOM and your presence on the score. Indeed, we're celebrating a regional man. Ashton Chase viewed the legal profession as a noble vocation that should be dedicated to serving people and justice. For him, law was not merely a set of rules and regulations, but an instrument to achieve justice and protect the marginalized. Throughout his illustrious career, Chase leveraged his legal expertise to champion workers' rights, challenge injustices, and uphold the principles of fairness and equality. His notable victories in court were not just legal triumphs, but affirmations of his belief that the law should be a powerful tool for social good. Now, we cannot celebrate Ashton Chase without celebrating people like Justice Ramson, Nanda Gopal, but more important than those, the leadership of the People's Progressive Party and the workers of this country. Those are the people he would like us to put ahead of him today. And that is why I can say to you, this government is committed in doing everything in our power to ensure the workers of this country enjoy a quality of life, and beyond the quality of life that they enjoy in their working life, that they're able to retire in dignity and pride. That is our commitment as we work for every single worker of this country. I assure you, and I assure those who are inspired by Ashton Chase and his work, that our commitment to One Guyana our commitment to the improvement of every Guyanese, our commitment to bridging any gap that exists within communities, among people, or within region, our commitment of lifting everyone towards a prosperous future is equal for every single Guyanese. Is equal for every single Guyanese. And those are the things that brought Ashton Chase to embrace the People's Progressive Party and shaped his thinking, and those are the things and values that this government cherish. And those are the things that we hold on to as we work towards building a stronger Guyana. Ashton Chase's life embodied personal integrity in public life. Throughout his career, he set an exceptional standard for public service. Chase's actions, whether in the political arena or the courtroom, are consistently guided by a deep sense of duty. Guided by what? A deep sense of duty. He resisted the temptations of power and self-interest, focusing instead on the welfare of the working class and the pursuit of justice. I've had personal experience with lawyers today that many people say are best if you have to go to the magistrate court. Experience I wouldn't like anyone to live or relive. Experience where the first thing the lawyer, or the way the lawyer welcomes you is put the money on the desk. That is not serving with a sense of duty. That is not what your profession requires of you. In reflection, we must do self-searching, individually and collectively. And the greatest honor we can pay to people like Ashton Chase is living their example. He focused instead on the welfare of the working class and the pursuit of justice. This earned him widespread respect and admiration. However, it also demonstrated the critical importance of ethical conduct in public life. His life was so rich in integrity and service that it now makes easy for those tasked with promulgating the ideals for which he stood. His ideals set the mission and the agenda of this nonprofit organization, launched in his honor and under his name. And I want to reinforce that. It is his ideals, it is his values, it is his standards that form the basis of this organization. It is his ideals that must set the mission and agenda of this organization, nothing else. And just as a reminder, Chase stood for the purity of the political vocation, the safeguarding of democracy, the rights and interests of workers, the law as an instrument of service and justice, integrity in public life, and living with a sense of duty, with nationalistic pride. These are the principles he stood for, and which I expect this nonprofit organization to also stand for and promote. To also stand for and promote. In this regard, I would like to commend those who are behind this initiative to establish the Ashton Chase Inc. I wish success to this nonprofit entity. I pledge my government's support for its work in being true to the ideals of a great Guyanese, nationalistic, patriotic, and champion of the working class. May the ideals of Ashton Chase continue to inspire generations. I thank you and God bless you.
You may all have your seats, everyone. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I am resisting it. I'm a lawyer by day and night, everyone. Thank you so very much for coming here. We have a cocktail reception planned for all of you. So we'll invite our special guests to make their way over to the cocktail area. Your Excellency, the Honorable Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the judges, the relatives and friends, and then we will also follow thereafter. So give yourselves a round of applause, everyone. Thank you so very much.